My life used to be what you could call ordinary, sometimes even too simple. I'm Katie Donnelly, a creative marketing employee at a large tech company. This company is renowned in the industry, influential, and had once been the place where I put all my trust. I always felt proud of my work, the projects I'd completed, and the strategies I created to help the company grow further. I had a stable job, a warm family life with my husband, Mark, and our 2 young children. Our house was in a quiet part of the city, not too far from the center, but enough to feel the contrast from the comforts of the more privileged areas. Mark's love for me was the certainty that gave me peace every time I came home. But everything changed. My job at the company started when I was just beginning my career, when I joined. I was a fresh graduate, full of passion and nostalgia. After years of dedication, I became one of the standout employees in the marketing department. The campaigns I managed were always highly successful, which led to more responsibility and larger projects. I was certain that much of the success came from the strategies that I and my team had built, yet none of that was enough to keep me around. You might think I was too complacent, but I truly worked hard, day and night. I not only finished my tasks, but also worked to build good relationships with colleagues and partners. But perhaps all those efforts weren't enough when a new person came to the company, Jason. Jason was a new face in the marketing department. He joined the company with many praises from the higher-ups and was handed several important projects. At first, I thought his presence would boost creativity and efficiency, a new teammate bringing in new opportunities. But soon, I realized something wasn't quite right. The projects I had been involved in, the strategies I had worked on, began to shift in ways I wasn't consulted on. I, who had always been behind the successes, now found myself increasingly pushed out of key meetings. Jason, despite lacking much experience in the industry compared to me, was given opportunities I believed I deserved. His name came up more often in meetings. His strategies started gaining approval from the higher-ups, and I stood there, watching everything unfold through a foggy glass. The most unsettling part was the feeling of being abandoned in the job I had dedicated years to. Each morning, I no longer felt excited like I used to. Every day at work became another round of asking myself what I would face next. In one team meeting, I did everything I could to convince the director of a marketing strategy I had long been nurturing, one that I thought could drive the company forward. But when I presented it, the director's gaze turned to Jason. He had completed the strategic task, and just a week later, I realized my ideas had been taken and presented under someone else's name. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the report that I had poured so much effort into, now being presented by Jason to the director as if it were his own work. Anger was a natural reaction, but there was nothing I could do. I felt like I was standing outside the game, as if everything I had done until then no longer mattered. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough, but rather that I no longer mattered. The biggest shock came soon after, when I received an email asking me to come to the director's office. I couldn't think of anything, just a bad feeling in my chest. When I walked into the meeting room, my boss was silent. No one said anything. The director and the others in the company all quietly looked at me. Even Jason was there, but not to work with me. What I received wasn't a regular performance review, but a decision that caught me completely off guard. "We'll have to let you go," the director said coldly. "We've decided to change the company's direction, and your creativity no longer fits." At that moment, I felt completely unbalanced. I couldn't even speak. I just froze. Any explanations after that seemed irrelevant. I, who had contributed to building the strategy, building the company's reputation, was now being shown the door. No respect, no thank yous, a cold, heartless decision with no regard for my contributions. Not only was I fired, but I was also betrayed. All my efforts had been taken by Jason, and now I had no place in the company anymore. As I left the meeting room, it felt as though I were frozen. Everything around me blurred. I wondered if I had been wrong to trust the people around me, but I also knew that in this situation, the only thing I could do was rise, find myself again. This betrayal wasn't the end, but a sign. I couldn't allow myself to remain weak. When I got home, I couldn't hide the disappointment. Everything around me felt strange. Mark looked at me, tired, but he didn't ask anything. I wanted to tell him what had happened, but I couldn't. The tension inside me was now something that couldn't be shared. My whole life, I had given my best, and now I had to start from scratch. But I didn't want to give up, even though it felt like everything had been taken away from me. And so, I stood there, in a dark apartment, asking myself, could I rise again? Could I rebuild my career from zero when I had lost trust in everything? The time after I was fired, I felt almost paralyzed. In the days following that shock, I didn't know what to do or how to face a life that had suddenly collapsed. I couldn't bear to look in the mirror because I didn't want to see the image of a failure. But then, one morning, after I had cried myself dry, I realized I couldn't continue living in this hurt. No one was coming to save me except myself. My old company, the people I once called teammates, had turned their backs on me. All that was left was me and the shattered pieces of my life that I had to piece together. Mark had always been there supporting me, but even he couldn't help me face what I was dealing with. That's when I realized I had to stand up on my own. I began to look for small opportunities, freelance work that I could take on to sustain myself, but everything was harder than I had imagined. In the beginning, I only received small, insignificant projects that barely brought in any stable income. Every time I submitted a proposal, I felt abandoned, forgotten in a sea of rising newcomers in the industry. However, I couldn't let myself fall into despair. Slowly, I regained my balance, telling myself that no matter what, I had once been at the top of this field. I had created brilliant strategies that now people like Jason were using to climb to success. This was unacceptable, and I knew that if I kept waiting, I would never get back what I had lost. I quietly began planning my comeback. Instead of confronting those who had betrayed me head-on, I decided to focus on creating something entirely new. I no longer wanted to be shackled by the past. I revisited ideas I had abandoned during my time at the company, strategies I believed would change the landscape of creative marketing. To make this happen, I had to shift my thinking and approach. No longer a background player in large campaigns, I started working alone, simple yet full of determination, the sleepless nights, hours of poring over materials, creating from scratch once more. Every step was slow. Every strategy I wrote felt like a weight on my mind, but I couldn't stop. I had to start over, and this time, I would give it everything I had. A month passed, and I was able to begin a small project of my own, starting with marketing strategies for small and medium-sized businesses. However, the further I went, the more I felt challenged. The freelance marketing market wasn't as easy as I had thought. I faced numerous difficulties. Competitors began appearing, directly challenging me on every front. Some clients I had worked with in the past were now influenced by rumors, by bad gossip from my old company, from Jason and those who stood behind him. Every time I faced a potential client, I had to prove I wasn't a failure. I had to show that I still had value, that I could do what I had done before. Rejected calls, canceled contracts. These were all challenges I had to face, but I didn't stop. Every time I failed, I stood up again, corrected my mistakes, and kept moving forward, slowly. I began building a small reputation in the market, a reputation that started being recognized by people who didn't know who I was in the past. I had truly started over from scratch, but I knew I had to do more. The peak of the challenges came when I received an invitation to participate in a large project. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. This project wasn't just valuable financially. It was an opportunity to prove that I wasn't a failure. But when I started looking into the competition in this project, I couldn't believe my eyes. Jason, the person I had once trusted, was behind this project. He was trying to dominate this market, using the very strategies I had created for his own project. At that moment, a surge of anger swelled within me. The feeling of betrayal came flooding back, stronger than ever before. But instead of confronting Jason, instead of facing him directly as I had once wanted, I decided to do something different. I would beat him, not with anger or hatred, but with the results I would create. I would prove to the world that I could do better than anyone else, that I could rebuild my career from scratch. From that moment on, I knew I wasn't just fighting for my career, I was fighting for my honor and my self-worth. I had prepared myself for a long battle, but this time, I was no longer the weak person I used to be. I was ready to rise and fight for what I truly deserved. Things seemed to be falling into place. I began receiving recognition from smaller clients. The small projects I had started through personal relationships, from people who knew me and trusted me. But I couldn't forget the betrayal from Jason and everything he had done. What I once believed to be my company, the one I had dedicated my youth to, had now become the place where I was discarded and replaced so indifferently. Although I had thrown myself into freelancing, there were still moments when I felt lost, battling alone against the invisible walls people had built from rumors and false stories. One day, while I was working with a potential client, a call came unexpectedly from one of my former partners. On the other end was a familiar voice from my days at the company, someone I had fully supported when they faced difficulties with a project. He said that my old company was facing major issues with their marketing strategy and that they needed my help. At that moment, I couldn't believe my ears. How could they come back to me after kicking me out? But this wasn't as simple as I thought. They didn't just want my help professionally. They wanted me to come back, but not as before. They wanted me to work without any contract or commitments. And of course, they would pay me far less than what I truly deserved. It was a frustrating twist. While I knew I had to start over, I never expected things to get so complicated. I couldn't accept going back to work for the people who had abandoned me. But what saddened and angered me even more was that Jason, the one I had once considered a teammate, was now leading the company with all the marketing strategies I had created. He wasn't just dominating the company, he was also tarnishing my image in front of everyone. Soon after, I received news about a big event that my old company was organizing. They were looking for marketing experts to discuss the future and trends in the industry. Jason was going to represent the company, and as usual, his successful strategies and accomplishments were being flaunted. This annoyed me, but I couldn't just sit still and take it. I needed to do something. The night before the event, I decided to attend. I could no longer let myself be overlooked. I started planning my appearance at the event. It wouldn't be the appearance of a failure, but of someone who had risen from shock. I had quietly prepared a presentation, not to directly confront Jason, but to prove that I was still a leader in the creative marketing field, even without the company, even without a support team. The next day, I arrived at the event with a calm but determined mindset. The event took place in a large, formal space, with the noise of conversations echoing around me. I found a quiet corner to stand and observe. Jason was on stage, with a self-satisfied expression and a confident tone, presenting the strategies that I had helped him develop. The attendees looked at him with admiration, but I felt nothing except coldness. Those strategies were now obscured by the false image Jason had built. He didn't just claim my success, he was trying to build his image through my shadow. When I stepped onto the stage to present, all eyes turned to me. I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt as though I had found myself again. I began sharing a new strategy I had quietly developed, not from the old strategies, but from something entirely fresh. A marketing strategy based on emotion and real connection with customers, not just relying on cold data and metrics like Jason's approach. I talked about how a truly effective strategy must connect with real values, not just numbers that speak for themselves. At that moment, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. People started paying more attention to what I was saying. Their gazes no longer fixed on Jason as before. A few people in the crowd started whispering to each other, and they began to question what Jason had been doing. It was a small turning point, but it was enough for me to feel that I was heading in the right direction. After finishing my presentation, I saw Jason standing in the corner of the room, his expression showing a hint of displeasure. He had definitely sensed the change in the air. The attendees were no longer just listening to him. They had begun to reconsider the strategies he had presented before. I could see insecurity rising in him, and I knew that this was only the beginning of this battle. Jason, no matter how talented he was, couldn't hide the truth forever that he had built everything on the stolen work of others. After the presentation at the event, I felt a strange sense of relief, although I couldn't immediately gauge the reactions. I knew I had done the right thing. What I said wasn't just about new strategies. It was a declaration, a way for me to assert myself in front of those who once thought I couldn't continue. From that moment on, I was no longer the person hiding in Jason's shadow. I was Katie Donnelly, a leader in creative strategies, someone reclaiming her place in the marketing world. However, not everyone was quick to change their view of me. Jason had certainly noticed the shift in the air. When I returned to the meeting room, I saw his gaze had changed. There was a hint of dissatisfaction, a touch of irritation, but I no longer paid attention to that look. What mattered now was how to rebuild my career, how to make those around me understand that I wasn't a failure, but someone ready to face any challenge. I didn't want to create conflict with Jason. I just wanted to prove that my success wouldn't be determined by those who had betrayed me. In the days that followed, I focused on my own projects. I no longer chased after small opportunities. Instead, I began actively creating new opportunities. I reached out to old partners, those I had worked with before, and proposed marketing strategies tailored to their real needs. Gradually, the first clients came back, and I began securing stable contracts. These were the first steps, slow but steady. But I knew this path wouldn't be easy. Everything was still fragile. One day, I received a call from an old friend in the industry. He said there was a large project in need of a marketing strategy head, although there were other candidates. He said he would help me get the opportunity if I wanted it. I knew this was a chance I couldn't miss, but after a moment of silence, I thought about those who still doubted me, especially Jason. He would never let me have this opportunity easily. I had to prepare for a new battle, not directly with him, but indirectly, through the results I would deliver. At this point, I was ready to start again. I began with the basics, revisiting the marketing strategies I had once created. But this time, they wouldn't be just ordinary strategies. I wanted to create something that didn't just meet customer needs, but conveyed a powerful message about perseverance and never giving up. about someone who had been pushed aside but still managed to rise. I worked day and night, refining, updating, searching for everything that could help me perfect this project. Every step, every decision was carefully thought out, ensuring I made no mistakes. One morning, while in a meeting with one of my partners, I received an unexpected email from someone I didn't expect, Jason. He said that the old company wanted to collaborate with me, and I could take on the tasks I had lost before. At first, I thought it was a joke, but when I looked closely, I realized something was off. Jason wasn't the one making this decision, but one of the senior executives I had worked with many times before. They wanted me back, but this time, not in the same role. They wanted me to be the head of marketing strategy, to help the company reclaim what it had lost. This invitation truly confused me. It wasn't just an opportunity to prove myself. It was a powerful counterattack. But I also understood that after deciding to stand up, I couldn't simply go back and accept what I had lost. I needed a new perspective, a completely different strategy, one that no one could take away from me. This wouldn't just be a personal victory, but a triumph of the values I had built. I decided to join the project, but this time, I would do everything my way. I was no longer the Katie Donnelly that the old company knew. I was someone who had been betrayed but had risen from the ashes. I began presenting new ideas, fresh strategies, and this time, I wouldn't let anyone take credit for my work. At that moment, I realized that the people around me were beginning to change how they saw me. Those who had once viewed me as a failure now had to look at me differently. The senior executives in the old company couldn't ignore this shift, couldn't dismiss the strategies I was bringing. Now, I knew that things were starting to change. Jason was beginning to feel the pressure. He was no longer the only one holding the marketing strategy in his hands. What I was doing wasn't just creating a good product. I was creating a comeback that Jason never saw coming. The greatest opportunity of my life had arrived, and I was ready to seize it. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. I'm not one for direct confrontation, not the kind to show off, but I chose to quietly prove myself through tangible results. Throughout the time I focused on this project, I skillfully changed the way people around me viewed me, not with words, but with the effective marketing strategies I had brought to the new company I was working with. The results from these strategies started to show their impact clearly. I wasn't just creating advertising strategies. I was changing the way things were done, the way we communicated with clients, bringing about results no one could deny. My comeback wasn't a bloody battle or a harsh face-off with Jason, but a silent war, step by step, strategy by strategy. And I knew that, whether I succeeded or not, what I needed was to prove my worth to those who had overlooked me, the way I worked, how I built relationships with clients, how I handled every detail of my tasks, became irrefutable evidence. Partners began to see me differently, no longer the person behind the ideas, but the one leading successful strategies. But the truth is, things weren't that simple. There were times, standing in front of an important meeting, that I felt waves of anxiety wash over me. Jason, with his sharp eye and years of experience, wasn't an easy opponent to dismiss. He had been nurtured in that environment, supported by the directors and his colleagues. I knew I had to change quickly, not only to reclaim what I had lost, but also to build a new future. And I understood that this change wouldn't happen overnight. One day, I received a call from a senior manager at my old company, someone I had worked closely with in the past. He called to inform me that the company was facing a major problem with their marketing strategy, something they couldn't solve on their own. Jason, who had been in charge of the marketing strategies, couldn't provide effective solutions for the current situation. And he, the person I had once helped, was trying to reach out to me for assistance in this difficult time. At first, I didn't want to help. I could refuse and continue on my path. But I also knew that this opportunity was my chance to make a real difference. I decided to take on the challenge, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to prove that my value wasn't tied to the past. I wasn't the one left behind. I was the one leading the changes they needed. The day I returned to the company wasn't a day for boasting or causing a scene. I walked in with a calm and confident mindset. It wasn't that I had forgotten the pain of the past, but I chose not to let it weigh me down anymore. I began working again with old partners, old colleagues, and I could see them starting to notice the change in me. I was no longer the Katie of the past. I was Katie of the present, someone who could bring creative, effective marketing strategies that fit the real-world situation. As for Jason, I could clearly see the failure beginning to show on his face. The strategies he had been applying were no longer working. The growth numbers he had once been proud of were starting to drop. The whole company could see it. The advice I had given began to be implemented, and the result was a strong shift in the company's overall strategy. Partners and clients began to come back, and soon the numbers started to improve. Jason, with all his arrogance, couldn't avoid the feeling of fear. He saw the changes, and he couldn't accept that he was slowly being replaced. Every success he had built was now being threatened. Even some people in the company began to gossip that, without me, the old company wouldn't have survived this crisis, and Jason was no longer the only one the company needed to grow. Finally, the day came when I stood before the company's directors to report the successes of my project. I knew Jason was sitting there, silently, with a face that no longer carried the pride it once had. He was no longer the only one being praised. Now, the results I brought had proven everything I had worked for, and I realized that, while he was still trying to protect his position, I was gradually claiming the space he had once held. I didn't need to confront him directly. I didn't need to criticize or retaliate. The results I delivered were the clearest answer. My story wasn't about revenge or hatred, but about perseverance and not giving up. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in direct confrontation, but in proving yourself through the results you create. And after all of this, I realized that the greatest price Jason had to pay was losing the trust of those who had once believed in him. His strategies were no longer being implemented, and his career was slowly deteriorating, as no one believed in what he did anymore. I didn't need to say anything else because the results had already spoken for themselves. This story isn't just about me, but about how people can rise after falling, and more importantly, it's about never letting the past control the present. Failures and pain are just stepping stones toward success, and sometimes the greatest form of revenge is the enduring success we build for ourselves. Those who betray you, those who don't believe in you, will ultimately pay the price with their own losses, and you, when strong enough, will prove that your true worth can never be taken away.